building. That character is fundamentally altered. So she said we couldn't fit it into the category of historically contributing because there were too many alterations, just as the code criteria mandates. Okay. The staff report alleges that this property can be rehabilitated in accordance with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation using physical and photographic evidence to support its assertion. That assertion is not correct. The Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation concludes with starts with a paragraph and concludes with a sentence before it goes through the 10 points of U.S. code saying the following standards are to be applied to specific rehabilitation projects in a reasonable manner, taking into account economic and technical feasibility. I have enclosed here an inspection report here, and that's part of this package that I'm going to submit as part of the record here, that the walls and ceilings and floors are constructed by lath and plaster walls so that no cavity space was left for mechanical, plumbing, and electrical systems and components to be installed and brought up to code, unquote. That's why you see all that plumbing and conduit on the outside and the insides of the buildings. There is no room to run any of this. That's why you see the window air conditioners all over the place. That's why there are literally electrical cords flowing out of those air conditioners on the ground that were being used illegally, totally not to code before I bought it. So here we're going to summarize the proof here. The evidence clearly shows that my property does not meet the code criteria for a contributing designation, nor does it meet the criteria for the NRB 15 that the staff report cited. This is what the staff report cited, NRB 15, and they did so because of the code, section 27-261, subsection 261, that says this document will be used as a portion of the criteria. Unlike this, though, that spells out what contributing and non-contributing are clearly, the HRB does not do so in 60 pages of text. And I have the PDF on file. I could submit as evidence as well. If we do a simple keyword search for the word contributing being the operative term, because that's what we're deciding here today, whether the property is contributing or whether it is non-contributing. The word contributing comes up in that 60-page document only 3 times. 2 of those are extraneous hits. The one extraneous hit, however, is the quote below here, the staff criteria that I've already read off. So once again, this code and this code both prove without dispute that my property is mislabeled as contributing when it should be non-contributing. Third bullet point here, the property is proven to be a multifamily zoned and used property for at least 30 years before the designation that shouldn't have been provided. Fourth, the staff reports and states that the additional initial designation was based on a function of reversibility. Once again, that's the wrong legal standard that was applied. Third major bullet, Bayshore, 1801 Bayshore property mirrors my case in 4 specific examples, and the ARC's legal ruling per the code centered on the remedial natures of those changes. Lastly, the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, as sound as they are, cannot be applied here because of the technical and economic feasibilities, the economic being subordinate to the technical feasibility in this case. The property cannot be rehabilitated as the staff report asserts. There's proven no space in there. So I will summarize with a sentence here on the entire package and analysis as well as this presentation that turns back to my statement at my opening, and that is, we preserve history best when we adhere to the Historic Preservation Code, and I would say in its entirety. Okay, I've got a little bit more time, so I want to now talk on one slide that I call code talk, and this can then transition to either question and answer as we go along. Section 27-257 is this right here, the nomination form. It also states in there that the HPC and City Council shall apply the following criteria, that's this again, as established in the nomination. So they're still bound, the HPC, we're all still bound by this code. So subsection 261 does not replace, supersede, or obviate this code at all either. So even though under the code provisions, it's going to consider the NRB here, number 15, that doesn't mean that this has been obviated. So then that begs a couple of interesting questions now. First off, what is the exact real criteria set forth in the NRB? As I said before, the word contributing, the operative phrase and the term that we're going to be using in this discussion and decision, is only mentioned 3 times, and the one time that it's mentioned in context, it supports a non-contributing position. But moreover, one is left to ask the question, are there two competing criteria by which we judge contributing and non-contributing properties? I don't think we collectively want to be in the position where we're trying to straddle 2 criteria. So one of these has to be preeminent. I'll finish by saying the NRB has no criteria for contributing and non-contributing like this one does. And that concludes my presentation.
Commissioners, Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff, with the staff report. I have a brief presentation that I'm going to use along with this, along with my staff report that you received in your packets. So let me go to that. So again, this is for 1314 South DeSoto Avenue for the request from the property owner to change the status from contributing to non-contributing in the Hyde Park Historic District. This is the general location map showing where 1314 South DeSoto Avenue is within the boundaries of the local and national Hyde Park Historic Districts. You can see it's on the southwest end of the district there. The aerial map at the top of your screen shows where the property is located at the northwest corner of DeSoto Avenue and Hills Avenue. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the view primarily looking at Hills Avenue here. That's the shorter side of the property, and DeSoto Avenue is the longer side of the property. The 1922 Sanborn Company map showed the building. It's sort of outlined in a blue there on their screen and on the map picture. It shows it as primarily a one-story clay tile building with a second story sort of pop-up made out of wood at the center of the building, and it also shows the front porch on the southwest corner of the house, shown in a wood construction as well. You can see that the dashed lines sort of indicate where there are openings. So you can see that the porch, shown in yellow in the first story at the bottom corner, is open on 2 sides, and then the second story wood frame structure appears to have some openings in it as well, indicating that it may have been partially open to the elements, which was commonly seen when part of a structure was used as a sleeping porch or sleeping room. Toward the back of the structure, there's an indication that there's auto storage. This is a circa 1923 aerial map of the Hyde Park area. It's looking from over Bayshore Boulevard north. There's a long road that you can see that's Howard Avenue, which terminates toward the bottom right of the picture. So if we zoom in a little bit closer, we can see the subject property in question, and this is the same photo that Mr. Blackwood showed in his presentation. So depending on how well you can see that on your screens, it does appear here as it did on the 1922 Sanborn map. That's primarily a one-story building with a second-story structure in the at its center. You can make out the openings where the front porch is on the southwest corner of the building, and clearly see that there's no second story directly above the porch at that time, or along the front of the building at that time. This is the 1931 Sanborn Company map showing the property in question outlined in blue there. You can see on it that it's clarified where the auto storage is. It's in the the original portion of the clay tile building. There's now an addition, a wood frame addition on the rear of the building. There's another building on the property, a one-story garage located to the northwest of the house. And the second-story structure appears to have expanded toward the front. So it looks like that second-story wood frame section has been brought forward toward Hills Avenue. There are really no changes between the 1931 and 1976 Sanborn Company maps, except that the 76 map is not in color. And then the next record that we have of the structure is from the 1984 Florida Master Site File form that was part of the survey for the Hyde Park Historic District. This is looking at the DeSoto Avenue side of the building. You can see the front porch open on that side. You can see where the garage was toward the rear of the building. And you can see that the second story has expanded over the front porch. These are the present day photos. The property appears to be on the DeSoto elevation, not substantially different from how it appeared in the 1984 photo, except that the garage for the auto storage toward the rear of the property has been enclosed, and you can see a couple of paired windows there where the garage door opening was previously. The picture on the bottom right shows the Hills Avenue elevation. So you can see that the second story has been expanded all the way across the front of the first story there. And you can see the stairs to the right there that Mr. Blackwood discussed in his presentation. Moving around to the east elevation of the building, again, the front of the building here are the Hills Avenue sides to your left. And you can see the second story addition over the original first story, and the stair addition on that side. And then the bottom right picture shows the north elevation, or the rear of the property, or the other rear of the property. So you can see the wood frame structure that's attached just to the side of the former garage there. So in 1985, the Hyde Park Historic District was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. 1314 South DeSoto Avenue was at that time considered to be a contributing altered structure. The initial designation of contributing altered was based on alterations that were deemed to be inconsistent with the structure's original character, but reversible. The nomination report for the National Register listed Hyde Park Historic District provided the following definition of altered but contributing structures. It was one in which The structure has undergone alterations inconsistent with its original character or one in which inappropriate materials have been used, but which retains most of its original visual character and can be returned with reasonable effort and cost to approximately its historic form. Altered but contributing covers a lot of territory, but some guidelines are fairly evident. The removal or covering of original exterior siding is considered a serious alteration. This is true even when the new material, aluminum or vinyl, visually approximates the original material, weatherboard. This alteration in particular concerns itself with short-term benefits to the detriment of the original fabric of the building. Enclosing porches, the removal of decorative architectural features, wholesale replacement of windows, the construction of non-conforming additions all generally cause a building to be labeled as altered. It has to be evident, however, that these changes are remedial in order to gain the designation altered but contributing rather than non-contributing. Altered but contributing buildings are considered certifiable as contributing to the district under the tax program. And I believe that refers to the federal tax credit program. In 1988, the city of Tampa designated Hyde Park as a local historic district. This is the portion of the map from the ordinance that adopted the Hyde Park as a local historic district. You can see there that the building is shown as a contributing structure for the local historic district. The legend for this particular map is difficult to read, but especially on these small screens. But when it is shown to be filled in with black, that indicates that it is a contributing structure. This is the full map from the Ordinance 88-199 from June of 1988, I believe. And again, showing just that portion where the building is at Hills Avenue and South DeSoto Avenue. In 1992, the maps appear to have dropped, for the local historic district, the maps appear to have completely dropped the contributing but altered category. The contributing structures on this map are shown outlined in a heavy dark line, while the non-contributing structures are shown to be outlined in a lighter weight line. And then by 2017, the adopted map for the local Hyde Park Historic District shows the contributing structures in gray and the non-contributing structures in white. So the request for the change of status from contributing to non-contributing for the structure in the Hyde Park Historic District was submitted in February of this year, February 16th, 2022. Built circa 1922, 1314 South DeSoto Avenue was built during the Hyde Park Historic District's period of significance, which is about 1886 to 1933. It was identified in the initial 1985 nomination for the National Register listed Hyde Park Historic District, and it was called out then as a contributing but altered structure. On the local designation adopting ordinance map, it was shown as a contributing structure for the local historic district. The structure has been shown as contributing on all maps for both the locally designated and the National Register listed Hyde Park Historic Districts. The classification of the structure has been consistent throughout its documentation. There have been alterations to the two primary elevations since 1985 when it was initially evaluated for the National Register Historic District. Except for the enclosure of the garage, the major alterations were in place along along the DeSoto Avenue elevation and the Hills Avenue elevation. Those alterations were in place at the time the structure was originally determined to be contributing. So its integrity has been maintained at the same level. The staff recommends as no significant alterations have been made to 1314 South DeSoto Avenue since its initial classification as a contributing structure to the local Hyde Park Historic District, that therefore the structure still meets the criteria used to determine its contributing status. Your action today is to move to approve or deny the request to change the status of 1314 South DeSoto Avenue from contributing to non-contributing. The Section 27261C of the City of Tampa Code of Ordinances directs you to review the provided evidence and to use National Register Bulletin 15 to determine the whether the building should be changed in its from its current status. So staff has provided some information from National Register Bulletin 15 in your staff report. The applicant provided additional information from National Register Bulletin 15. Essentially, for historic districts, you're looking at whether the component of the district, this particular structure, can contribute to the historic district's significance. And essentially, it's National Register Bulletin 15 tells us that a component of a district cannot contribute to the significance if it has been substantially altered since the period of the district's significance, or it does not share the historic associations of the district. So with that, I'm available if you have any questions, and otherwise that completes the staff report. Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this matter? Please come forward. I notice we'll need to have another swear-in event.
Oh, I swore in my hand.
Will anyone else be speaking today?
Yes.
Yes.
You're both going to be standing. No, you both. Just stand.
If you raise your right hand, ma'am.
Excuse me, where?
Right there.
You stand right there.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will be giving today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay, hi, my name is Patrick Cimino. I live at 604 South Oregon Avenue. I am speaking on wearing three hats today as I speak. I'm the Vice President of Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. I'm also presenting a letter from the Spanish Town Creek Neighborhood Association, and I will speak very briefly as a homeowner. Basically, the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association at Spanish Town Creek support maintaining the contributing nature of this structure. HHP&A's board voted for this because the weight of the expert and substantial evidence has weighed in on this over decades. As it's already been outlined, it came through with the initial survey. This was reviewed in 2018 by the ARC staff. They recommended maintaining it with different codes, but maintaining the contributing nature, and then most recently with the HPC staff. So we definitely support that conclusion that this structure should maintain its contributing nature. Basically, Spanish Town Creek, in a few less words, corroborates that same position. As a longtime homeowner in Hyde Park of 3 historic homes, doing varying renovations on all of them, all contributing, there is a lot of modifications that have happened in these houses over the years. And if that criteria was absolute, which I know it takes a lot of interpretation and it does take experts to look at, we would not have very many contributing structures remaining. So we do have to look beyond a lot of that. And I have spent way more money on my houses renovating them than I bought them for, even at high inflated prices in the last 5 years. So at any rate, as a homeowner, I would expect people to have to adhere to preserving the contributing structures. So that's my comments, and I appreciate your attention. I'm going to submit these letters. Thank you.
May I have a motion to receive and accept, please?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign? Do we need a second motion for this document as well?
Yes, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. I apologize. There is additional information from the property owner. If you could just have a motion for that as well, to receive and file his information.
May I have a motion to receive and accept the property information from the owner?
So moved.
Second, please.
I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion passes. Ma'am, would you like to come forward to speak, please?
My name is Luzette Lightfoot. Can you all hear me all right?
Not quite.
Can
But
you-
please state your name and address for the record.
I just did. My name is Luzette Lightfoot. I live 2 doors down from the property that you're discussing, 2119 West Hills Avenue. Oh, I've lived there now for 24 years. When my late husband and I first bought the property, the house that you're talking about was in deterioration at that time. That was 24 years ago. It has not improved at all over the years, to the point where we wished and hoped that someone would come and improve our neighborhood. At least that corner of our neighborhood. Jim Blackwood is giving our neighborhood some hope that that can finally happen. When I stand here and tell you deterioration, that's mildly putting it. We have seen attempted murder in that house, police cars coming at a time of the day and night. We have seen derelicts living in behind the house, and I live 2 doors down. I have a 2-story 1925 home. I agree with the gentleman that spoke a while ago. A lot of renovations have to be made, but that is not a renovation situation. That is an absolute deterioration project. That project is never ever going to be any better unless someone comes in and is willing to put the time and the money into it. I'd like to elaborate on all the ways that your approval of this plan would enhance and improve our neighborhood, my little corner of Hyde Park. But I won't take up your time. However, I do want to say that it would be a travesty not to approve Jim's plan. And I'm talking from my heart, from a neighbor, from a person who lives and has to look at that property and has to pass by that property day and night. As a long-standing homeowner in the community and a very heavy property tax payer, I only want to see this improvement for my neighborhood. Not only do I want to see it, I think it's essential that you consider this very seriously. We need to bring our neighborhood back up to where it once stood in the estimation of this city. It's historic, and I think that with Jim's plan, It will enhance the historic attraction of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Are there any other comments to be made by the public? Seeing none, I will close the, no.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. The property owner is allowed to have 5 minutes of rebuttal.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's okay.
No, I have no further comments. I think the facts speak for themselves. Thank you.
And again, Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I just want to remind the board of the criteria in which the board is to use in consideration for this application. And that's outlined in 27-261, subsection C. Actually, subsection I, criteria for review of application. The criteria to be applied by the HPC in approving or not approving an application filed hereunder shall be the criteria set forth in the National Register Bulletin number 15 or any amendment or replacement thereof. So please consider that criteria in the code to determine whether or not the application as presented should be approved or not approved.
Thank you.
You can close the public hearing and have a discussion
And may
unless
I
there's
have
questions.
a point of clarification? Once the public hearing is closed, the commissioners may then ask questions of the staff or the property owner?
You could ask questions now, but if you have questions for the property owner, he will be entitled to a rebuttal. Or if you ask questions of the staff, he will be entitled to rebuttal. You could certainly ask questions of staff or the applicant, but I wouldn't have you close the public hearing.
Okay, then I think I would prefer then to allow the commissioners to ask any questions that they may have of the property owner and or the staff. And Ms. Cobb, would you like to begin? Maybe? Okay.
This is for Ms. Lund. Can you show the two pictures again, the original and the current? I'm sorry, of the actual house, not, this is.
That
Okay,
was it.
that's the original, okay. And then the current,
It's down in the corner.
I thought you had a photo showing, on the same slide, showing the original home.
Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff. This is a slide showing the historic aerial photograph of the house and the present day
Right.
construction. Sorry? And we have the photo from 1984. Is that what you would like to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
If
I'm not sure.
that was it? Are you? Well, then we'll come back to you, please.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's directed to the staff or to the owner, but was the property originally, when it was included in the district, that it was noted that it was like a multi-use, like, for apartments?
I think that's better for the staff than me. I'm doubting so, but that's just my suspicion.
Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff. If you bear with me just a moment, I can pull that up for you.
Yeah, Elaine, you just went past it. Can you, down in the lower right-hand corner, it says original use residence, and present use is residence.
The evidence that I provided in my original application disputes that present use, though. There's two ads from the Tampa Tribune, one from 1953 and another one from 1959, advertising apartments, rental units for rent.
Yeah, those are pretty much unreadable in the copy that we received. However, it appears that the master site file does not distinguish between single-family or multifamily. It simply states residential. And that's to differentiate it from a commercial property.
I'm going to follow up on that line. And maybe this is a question for staff, which is when you do these original reports, I know there's obviously a designation as to the use, but in terms of the designation process, it doesn't matter what the use is, as far as I understand. It also, for example, the interior of the property only matters if you're going after Secretary of the Interior tax credits. So in the local designation, all we look at is the exterior of the structure and not the inside of the structure. So that's a comment and a question. And then I'm going to follow up with another one from Mr. Blackwood. You have a letter from an architect, but do you have any more information stating that it's simply not possible to rehab this building?
Well, I provided the statement from the inspector there that said there was insufficient room or no room for plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and components in the walls, floors, or ceilings.
And is that because it's a block, a terracotta block structure?
It was built out of concrete, covered with stucco, and yes, terracotta block is interior. It's not visible, but yes, built slab on grade. And fairly ironic, the Pierce family that built it had a role in the turn of the century electrifying parts of Tampa and didn't leave sufficient room for their own future equipment in the house.
Well, as somebody who renovates a lot of these buildings, what we often do on the inside, again, as long as we're not going after the Secretary of Interior's tax credits, which most people rarely do because the standards are very high, as you know, there's certainly the ability to fur out interior walls and ceilings to
That's true,
allow
and
for that.
I looked at that and I considered that because my original intent in buying this through, whether it's informal witness or formal contractor witness was to restore it, to bring it up, et cetera. But it was only after a period of literally years of kind of piecing things together, doing a formal inspection report, that I saw that it was not only impossible and unfeasible, but then I looked further into its actual designation and status, and I presented the evidence that I did. But to your point about furring things out, there's electrical conduit on the outside of the building, on the inside of the building, and on the most, quote, restorable components might be the front of the house. That electrical conduit is all running on the outside of the original drywall. That would all have to come off. We would have to pull all of that out. That would bury the casings of all of those windows. We could, potentially, and I've done extensive renovations, so I'm not adverse to breaking my wallet on this stuff to do what is right. But it would have to build out the wall and then have probably a 1-foot windowsill almost to enable that. So conceivably, yes, anything is possible on that. Just like anything is, quote, reversible, given unlimited either funds, economic, or even reason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Can Ms. Lund answer the questions asked by the board regarding what is considered during the designation process is regarding to the use of the property, and whether or not for the local landmark or local historic district, is there any consideration of the interior versus exterior components of the residence?
Yes, Elaine Lund. The commissioner was right on both points. We do not consider use when determining whether or not a building physically retains its architectural integrity, and we do not look at the interior of the structure. We only consider the exteriors unless it is an application for locally for an ad valorem tax credit.
Commissioners, are there any other questions, please?
Yes, Dominique Cobb. I have a question in regards to the alteration of the siding and the enclosure of the carport. This question is for staff. Is there any type of permitting that can be found for that change? Because maybe that can answer when it was changed over to multifamily, because it looks as though that those sidings was changed to cover the second structure, the addition to the second structure. So maybe, do you have any of those permitting?
Elaine Lund, during the research that I did for the permitted activities on this site, the only permit that I believe that I found was for the exterior stairwell, and if there was anything else, I would have included that in the staff report, so just let me check that real quick. Did not find any permit records on the enclosure of the garage or anything referencing the siding. I should note that I believe that the permit records are kept for about 10 years per our retention schedule.
Thank you.
In reply to the commissioner's question, the carport, or that garage fill-in, simply expanded the existing apartment rental space. That space existed in the rear bedroom since at least 1953, and the enclosure just expanded that further.
Thank you.
Another question?
Yes, Ms. Lund, can you review the period of significance again and show us the photo that, or photos that comport to that?
Yes. The period of significance for the Hyde Park Historic District is 1886 to 1933. So anything built from 1886 to 1933 is potentially a contributing structure in the district. And then, I'm sorry, you wanted to see the...
Yeah, either the layout, describe what it looked like, or and/or photo.
Okay, so on the 1922 Sanborn map, you can see the structure with the area that's shown in red or pink here is the first story. That's the tile construction with the one-story porch shown in that bottom left corner of the structure, and then the second story wood frame area at the center of the building.
So the yellow part in the middle is a second story?
Yes, with the 2 on it. Yes.
And all the red is one story?
Correct, except for the
And
porch.
the photo on the right is the current
Yes.
photo?
Correct.
So there wasn't a photo then?
We had just the aerial photograph.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And what was there? I guess maybe they, in the whole district, they didn't identify how each structure contributed, did they?
No, not specifically.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I have another question of staff. When the period of significance is established, we know that, for example, in this case, that the original structure, as shown in the photograph in 1923, had a second-story unit, but it certainly appears that the second story, what we are calling the front porch, that faces hills, was not there. Is that correct?
We know that currently, yes.
Yes, and so what we don't know is when that porch was put on, correct?
We do not know when it was completed across the front, the second
Okay.
story.
But isn't it also true that even though all these properties have had multiple modifications over the years, that the modifications that occur, can they themselves have their own historic designation, meaning that the designation isn't something that's frozen in time? Over time, a property can change, and those changes, even outside of the period of significance, will then acquire significance.
That is correct, if they do occur within the period of significance.
Did this, and just again, I just need to understand, when this was designated, the property had not been, so it was designated, but the property has not been substantially altered since the period of the district significance. Secondly, that any alterations that were done to this building, including that that's heinous stairwell, was approved by the ARC, and that it does share the historic association of this district. Is that correct?
The major alteration to this building since its initial construction being the expansion of the second story across the Hills Avenue elevation. We do not know exactly when that was completed. It may have been after the period of significance, but it was definitely after the building was initially found to be contributing.
But it was, when it was designated in 1985, that porch was there, correct?
Yes,
So
correct.
that was all part of the original report that was done at the time, and so the building in its entirety was considered to be historically significant, meaning because that porch was put on after the period of significance, we think, we don't know, but at the time of designation in the 1980s, the whole thing, including that front second-story porch, was in fact part of the designation, correct?
Yes, it was all found to be contributing.
So
the
it's
structure as a whole.
significant. It's considered significant from a historic standpoint, regardless of whether it was or wasn't there in 1923. It's part of the package.
It is part of the entire contributing structure.
So the porch that we know of at this point is only that first story porch, the one that's on the, I'm going to say the southwest corner, forgive me for not knowing all my cardinal points, but that has not been significantly altered from the time of construction.
That area does not appear to have been, no.
Okay, thank you.
What we do, to your question there, Commissioner, what we do know is that the porch was completed in some manner to facilitate rent to a tenant, at least as far back as 1959.
Yes, and that was very much so a part of the history of Hyde Park. There
Yes.
was that era after World War II where so many of the houses, as you know, were subdivided into apartments, and then come the 1970s, 80s, they started to return back to single-family use. It doesn't appear that that happened to this one, but certainly that was part, the historic pattern of use was, that definitely correlates.
I suspect this one didn't return back only because of the zoning allowed the multi. The other ones didn't have.
Yes, correct. It's an RM24, is that correct?
This is RM24 currently. It was historically zoned R3A starting in 1956. So it's multi-family use, multi-zoning is roughly 70 years old.
And one more question for you, Mr. Blackburn. If, and you may not know this, but if it's non-contributing, obviously it can be torn down. How many units do you think you could get on this property?
I've done the math on that. It's not my intent to do anything at this point. I'm taking one step at a time, but the math of the size of the lot allows a I don't know, what's the word, right, volume or density or something like that. It's either 4 or 5 units, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice lot, I mean, certainly I could see
But,
that.
you know, I'm not a typical developer, that's the thing. I'm not a developer by title at all either. I've renovated and developed some properties, but I am insanely detailed on the interiors as well as the exteriors. This is beyond the scope of the hearing, I understand that, but I've looked at where the church is and where the apartment is, and there is a necessity for some type of massing and intimacy of some measure that mirrors those angled setbacks that could blend in perfectly with either an addition or a separate structure or some combination thereof. But that's very hard to articulate and sell or to explain to somebody, because they only know and see what is done, and the mechanics of getting there and explaining or either promising are much more problematic, as you well know as a contractor.
Go right ahead.
I'm going back to, picking up on your point, and I agree with Commissioner Shoecraft back on the zoning issue. The fact that it's multifamily versus single family in this case, and with the guidelines in Bulletin 15, we're really looking at the exterior, not the use. So that point, that it was single family and now multifamily or vice versa, that's really irrelevant to this particular case, because we're really talking about the exterior. And when I look back at some of the things mentioned in Bulletin 15, and I think Ms. Cobb said, you know, there's always going to be alterations. No building is going to remain the same, and whether we characterize it as remedial or whatever word we use, obviously there's interpretation, and that's why we have guidelines. So on the taking the words from Bulletin 15, although there have been a lot of changes to this building over time, it says define the essential physical features that, you know, represents its significance, and those physical features that are visible, and that whether or not the property retains the identity. So although there have been many alterations over time, and, you know, it also speaks to workmanship, well, the recent workmanship is also immaterial to this. Is like, that's why we restore and rehabilitate properties. So I think there are a lot of things in here that, in Bulletin 15, that speak to, although there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this building, and a lot of work, not so great, maybe has been done, and understanding why you said you bought it in the first place. There's no question here. I'm just.
If
I do
there's
have
not
a-
a question, this is the question and answering.
I guess my question is, back to staff, is, I think you noted that we don't know why this particular building was designated, not designated, what its contribution or criteria. We don't know that because it was in a whole district and they didn't assign that to each building.
Well, we do know the criteria by which it was adjudicated.
No,
right?
I was asking Ms. Lund.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think she already said we didn't know
Okay.
why
Yeah.
any particular structure in there was
That
said
is-
to be contributing.
Yes, that
Okay.
is correct. There's not, the Florida Master Site File form for the building, and the designation report or the nomination report for the National Register District. Neither of them expand on the individual buildings to that point.
And I'm sorry, I have one other. So, as I understand it, it was originally built with the second story in the middle and first one story around it. And then at some point, you said we didn't know when it was finished. Do we know when that porch expansion on the second floor was started?
We can reasonably say, as the homeowner, looking at the tile work, both upstairs apartment as well as downstairs, it's got that characteristic 1950s, I call it bomb bunker tile. So it's that really thick stuff that probably looks at somewhere in the 50s. They renovated and then listed it for rent, as evidenced by the Tampa Tribune article.
Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff. By 1931, on the Sanborn Company map, it appears that that central second story was beginning to be brought forward toward the front of the house.
Oh, okay.
Right there, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
that was
And that-
1931.
And that was still within the period of significance
That
for
was.
the district, within
And-
the 1933.
Correct, 1930, yes. 1931 was before 1933.
Thank you both.
Now, Commissioner, on your point about significance as it's described in the Historic Register Bulletin, the significance is they kind of, in a cumbersome way, describe it is essentially a function of integrity. And then there are these 7 elements of integrity that were included in the staff sheet, but they weren't described as the NRB describes them. That part was removed. But in my analysis of those 7 elements of integrity that underpin the significance, only one of them applied out of the 7. And that was location, by being physically located within the historic district.
I don't have a question, so I'll
Okay.
Are there any other questions for staff or the applicant? Hearing none, then we will close the.
Can you just allow the property owner just 5 minutes just for rebuttal in case there's anything else he'd like to add to the record?
All
Thank
right.
you very much, but I have no further comment on this.
Okay, now you can.
All right, now we will close the public hearing. And commissioners, are there any comments that you would now like to make relative to this application? And we'll start at this end instead of that end this time. Ms. Shukra.
So integrity, as was noted, is basically, there are 7 different items: location, design, setting, material, workmanship, feeling, and association. And these, as we all know, has some measure of interpretation over time. Even the bulletins get interpreted in different ways. However, it's my opinion that, as a historic preservationist, that many of these still apply to this particular structure. But more importantly, this structure has not been substantially altered since the period of the district's significance, except for really the 2 top portions of what we're going to call the second story. And it does share the historic association of the district. This was a district that was, the integrity of the district and certainly the value of this historic district was, it was primarily a single-family residential district that had structures that were built between 1886 and the early 1930s. And this clearly lands right in the middle of that. It's the design certainly follows the tenets of what would have been designed at that time. This was sort of a modest 2-story structure. Materials used at that time, the block, were certainly part of the materials used for structures in this historic district. And as somebody who has worked in these kind of buildings, I can certainly sympathize. They're not easy. The frame ones are so much easier to work in, but yes, they can be remediated over time. So in my opinion, the essential physical features are still there. And the aspects of the integrity that are vital to this property being nominated are still present. So I will be voting to keep the designation as contributing.
Commissioners, anyone else wishing to make a comment? In that case, I would like to draw attention to a sentence in the National Register Bulletin 15 on our report, page 3. Ultimately, and I quote, "Ultimately, the question of integrity is answered by whether or not the property retains the identity for which it is significant." And I think as we listen to Ms. Shoecraft's comments regarding the 7 aspects of the integrity, that surely answers a question with respect to this particular facility. The references made to the current condition and the activities that apparently are going on in the structure are irrelevant to a large extent to whether or not the building still retains some of the 7 aspects of its original integrity. And I think we need to focus our attentions on those aspects. If there are no other comments wished to being made, may I have a motion, please? We have either a motion to deny the designation, keeping the designation as contributing, or a motion to approve retaining the designation. Changing the designation. Changing the designation to non-contributing. And let's not be confused about, as I did, between the two. The motion to deny would be keeping the designation as contributing, and the motion to approve would be to change the designation to non-contributing. So,
I would like to make a motion.
please.
I move to deny the application to change the designation status of the building, structure, or object for the property located at 1314 South DeSoto Avenue as contributing to non-contributing for the following reasons. Applying criterion C, the property embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, possesses high artistic values, or represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components lack individual distinction. Further, this property maintains its essential physical features to convey enough significance and holds on to the aspects of integrity that are vital to the property being nominated in the first place, and they are still present.
May I have a second? Commissioners? Am I allowed to second a motion?
You can second a motion. You just
Then-
can't make a motion.
Then I will second the motion to deny. All those in favor of the motion to deny, which means keeping the designation as a contributing structure, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Well, can you, I see a raise of hands, I'm sorry.
Okay. You have to raise your hand if you accept.
Okay, so that motion failed.
Then we need another motion, please.
Is there an appetite for or allowance for continuing this so that we can review the materials that were provided?
No, that's not the request. Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. The property owner is not asking for a continuance.
Okay.
May I have another, and there is no further,
There has to be another, there has
motion?
to be another motion.
I guess I can repeat my motion, but it
Well,
doesn't.
someone else has to make a motion if they didn't vote to approve, to deny the request. There has to be a motion to approve the application.
And if we cannot ask the applicant if he was
No,
willing
there
to.
hasn't been a request for continuance.
Okay. Can I make a motion for, I'll just make a motion for, I guess, discussion purposes?
You have to make a motion to open the public hearing.
To do what? Oh, to further
to
discuss.
discussion.
I mean, are you discussing a motion or are you?
No, I was
discuss-
gonna make I don't wanna make this motion, that's why I think we're all, we're all, feeling the same thing, but,
Are you trying to you could discuss, you could discuss amongst
If we
yourself,
open-
but if you're asking questions of the
Yes.
public or.
well, I'm not sure there is there further discussion?
Well,
Okay,
I think there should be, because there was
Yes.
three of
Okay.
you denied the.
So I would like to make a motion to open up public comment to discuss amongst the
Well,
commissioners.
you don't have to open the public hearing to discuss amongst yourself, you can
Oh.
just discuss.
Oh, okay, then I
If that's what you're
misunderstood.
trying to do.
Yes, yeah.
What if you have a
Okay.
question for staff? What if you have a question for staff?
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. If you have a question for staff, then you do have to make a motion to open the public hearing, and you have to allow the property owner time for a rebuttal.
So I would like to make a motion to open up public comment because I have a question directed towards staff.
Okay,
All those in favor?
well, there hasn't been
I'll
a second.
Oh, you gotta make a motion.
Thank you for.
Okay, all those in favor of reopening the public comment portion signify by saying aye.
Aye. All right.
Can you raise your hand for that vote, please? Okay, so 3, thank you.
Who seconded, please?
She did. All those opposed, same sign. And motion passes. The public hearing will be reopened.
Thank you. This question is for Ms. Lund. Can you give a definition on reversibility really quick, just so I can, for my memory and also for the commissioners, kind of get an understanding of what reversibility is as it regards to this structure? And I believe the site owner went over it a bit, but I would like it from staff so that we can know where the staff stands on understanding. I know we spoke about in the presentation, and that was something I highlighted. While staff is searching, the reason why I asked for reversibility, because I noted even though the sidings were done after, or it hasn't been established after the contributing time of 1933, I noticed that the sidings had severe alteration. So if I can just have a point of clarity on what the standards are
The
from the city.
siding, are you
There's
saying
no-
siding, S-I-D-I-N-G?
Yes, siding.
There's no change to the siding.
There is no change
It's
to the
exactly the
siding.
same. Stucco.
It's stucco.
It was stucco and it's now stucco.
I thought there was information provided by
Mr.
Mr. Blackwood, sorry, I almost said Blackburn. Blackwood, that there was asbestos or something,
Yes, there's asbestos
Tiles.
siding that wraps the upper porch.
the porch,
Yeah,
okay.
That's what the
Asbestos
material
siding.
is.
That is not,
I don't see it, but maybe there's a better photograph?
yeah.
Well,
I
can
mean,
we pull
where
up the
is it?
PowerPoint slides? Yeah.
Oh, I think maybe I see it now.
Yeah, that upper porch is all asbestos siding.
But the rest of the structure is still stucco?
Correct.
And siding can be removed?
The whole porch would be removed.
The siding,
Hold on, Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the city attorney's office. I just want to make sure we have a point of order. Ms. Cobbett asked a question of staff about the definition of reversibility.
Yes.
Can we get that clarification first?
Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff. The City of Tampa Code of Ordinances does not provide us with a definition for reversible, so if we look to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, they do have a definition for reversible, I'm sorry, not for reversibility, but the definition for reversible is capable of being reversed or reversing, such as A, capable of going through a series of actions such as changes either backward or forward, B, having two finished usable sides, or C, wearable with either side out. And then the second definition of reversible provided is a reversible cloth or article of clothing.
Thank
So-
you, Ms. Lund.
Mr. Blackwood, would you like to comment?
Just on the front porch there too. I mean, if I heard the commissioner on the end's comment that has now been deemed historic by some measure with the asbestos siding, I guess the asbestos siding is historic now too?
am I allowed to respond?
I mean, you could certainly reserve your comment during your discussion phase if you want to discuss, or if you have additional follow-up questions, it's up to you.
Hold on, I think the staff has something.
Mr.
afternoon.
Fernandez, would you like to make a comment?
I would like to sort of refocus the discussion. This is not a debate back and forth between the applicant and the board. This is consideration of the application before you and the eligibility criteria to move it forward either for approval or denial. So I would encourage you, if you have questions during this period, to go ahead and ask those questions so that you can move the process forward. But I don't want to open up a environment of debate during this hearing at this point. It's beyond that point. It's your consideration of the application before you.
I have a question for staff. Elaine, because I just want to clarify for myself, I guess. When the building was incorporated into the district, it was with all the changes except for the back stairwell.
From the photograph taken during the survey, it is, in 1984, it appeared that the garage had not yet been enclosed and was still functional as a garage. So that occurred sometime after the initial survey, and the only dates that we have for the other activities are from the 1990s when the ARC approved the addition of the exterior stairs.
Okay. And I had another question. Do you have, because of the district, the buildings were not individually looked at, so we're not talking about like individual designation, but designation as a whole group. Do you have examples of buildings that were altered over time from the original period of significance? Because that's what I'm stuck with. It's like the original period of significance, the building, great. But all the additions that were made to it kind of, messes with the original design. And then it was incorporated into the district with all of those changes. So are there examples of other buildings like that in the district?
I'm sure they are. I'm not prepared to review those with you today.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. The addition of the stair and the side as a permitted thing, it appeared to me that was not a new stair, but a modification or an improvement of a stair that already existed. Is that clear, or is that true of that permit application?
Is that a question for me?
That would be, I think, a question for staff.
Okay. Elaine Lund, from my research through the records that we have from our department, which includes code enforcement records, it appears that staircase was initially built without permits and then came through for approval after the fact.
Uh-huh.
May I make a comment?
And that looks like it was 1993.
Yes.
May I make a comment?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Could I pull up the slides, please, on mine? I've got a backup slide on that. What staff noted is everything I understood as well on the permit history. This is a photo of the permit that was enclosed. The permit was not followed, and that's why you got this two bumps in this, with the stairs having been built and then approved later after they were built by the ARC, and they were approved in November 1994. They had to reorient, or were told to reorient the stairs to comply with the zoning requirement, i.e. the zoning code, because they point to the street instead of pointing to the rear. But the permit that was approved, if you see that, if you can go through that diagram, the permit that was approved had the stairs going to the rear, so somewhere in the construction they decided to change it and point them toward the street. So that's an illegal staircase there. Number two, it's also in violation of the Hyde Park standards, as I brought up in my presentation, because it's built on the street side. So it's both illegal as well as inappropriate. I don't know how the ARC approved that, being in violation, clear violation of the Hyde Park standards.
I have a question for staff. And my question is this. The period of significance was 1886 to 1933. The local historic district was done in the 1980s. At that time, many of the structures in the Hyde Park Historic District were altered, some well and some not so well. But at the time of designation, I just need to understand this, at the time of designation in 1985, once the structure was designated, the entire building was designated, including the alterations. Is that correct? Meaning you didn't have a building that was designated except for this component, meaning the whole structure, the property itself, the exterior was designated at the local level, and then the design guidelines are what guided any of the alterations. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yes, Commissioner, you are correct. There is no case that I'm aware of in which part of a building was called out as contributing and part was not.
And do you know of any historic districts across the country, locally designated, that essentially, after they were designated and the period of significance is the only thing that was there, meaning, in this case, there had been no changes since 1933 and 1985. Do you know of any historic district in the country that meets that criteria?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
Thank you.
At this time, if no other commissioners have any more dialogue, I would like to make a motion.
No,
We
can he
need
have-
to close.
No, he has to allow him minutes for a rebuttal.
Yeah, I would, to the commissioner's statement there, I would just like to bring it back to what staff report already noted in the staff summary, that the initial designation of contributing altered, so we had, remember, we had three designation options, contributing altered, so they understood the alterations. And then they also further stated, was based on alterations that were deemed inconsistent with the structure's original character. So I'll just leave it at that.
That concludes your remarks?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
So now
right.
just a motion
I
to
would
or just
now have a
the
motion
public
to
hearing.
close the public hearing.
So moved.
I second the motion.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Public hearing is closed. Ms. Cobb, you had indicated you had a motion.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve the application to change the designation status of the building, structure, or object for the property located at 1314 South DeSoto Avenue as contributing to non-contributing for the following reasons. No significant architecture style or construction technique. Over the years, and the information provided, I've seen that the residence has been significantly altered. Also, there has been a illegal structure, so I make the motion to approve the change of designation.
I second that.
There is a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by aye and show a sign.
Aye.
All those
Opposed.
opposed to this motion signify by sign and affirmative. Aye. So the motion fails.
Now you have to do a new motion.
Now we need a re-motion. Ms. Shucraft, would you restate? I guess a point of order, counsel. Can Ms. Shucraft restate her original motion, or does she?
If that's what she desires.
Okay.
I would, do I have to repeat verbatim, or?
If you.
I would just like to restate my original motion.
Right, and if there's any
to-
additional basis that you want to provide, that's fine.
No, ma'am. No, we're past that. Is there a second?
We need a second.
I second the motion.
All right. All those in favor of the motion to deny, which keeps the designation as contributing, signify by saying aye, and show of hands.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion passes 3-2. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. And we will now move on in our agenda, if I can find it.
If I may just suggest a 5-minute break, just to allow
Okay.
the stenographer to break down and just move on.
on to item number 8 on our agenda, the North Hyde Park update.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager, here to update you on item number 8. If you recall, back in April, it was April the 13th, we had a meeting to initiate consideration of the expansion of the Hyde Park local historic district to include the area north of the current boundary line. Do we have a map that we can show? Might help our discussion. You can get the map there. I think it'll give you a visual. I think most of you are well apprised of this, though. The application was brought to the commission by the two neighborhood associations that essentially compose the area. That would be the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. At that hearing, staff did notice, in accordance with the code, section 27-149. However, there was a procedural error with the notice. And as a result, the notice was determined to be flawed and unable to proceed through the process for consideration at council in its current form. So we are, have been speaking to the applicants. I believe one of the representatives is here today about a path moving forward, which would be to have to renotice the hearing and bring it back to the commission for consideration once again. I know that's quite an undertaking. We apologize for that defect. However, I think erring on the side of caution, it does give us the ability to perhaps address some of the feedback that we heard at the first hearing. We, in talking with the applicants, and they have retained legal counsel as well since we last met, we're looking at possible dates in August and September to notice to bring back the hearing. Now, when we met in April, we did have a special time. We met at 5:30 p.m. instead of meeting at the normal 9 a.m. So I would recommend that, and we will be coming back to you individually, most likely, if we don't meet in July, to determine a date that works with everyone's schedule to be able to actually publicly notice that meeting. So I wanted to give, I know Mr. Chimino's here, he may have something to add, but I wanted to give that update to you and just let you know that we have some additional steps before we're able to move that forward to City Council's consideration. Did you want to speak here?
Thank you all. The only thing I'll add, I'm Pat Chimino.
Could you please, I'm sorry, state again your name and address for the record?
I'm Patrick Chimino. I'm Vice President of Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, and I live at 604 South Oregon Avenue. We really appreciate the efforts that have gone into this at both the level of the ARC and the Historic Preservation Commission. We understand that this is primarily a procedural issue, and we're comfortable with moving ahead as expeditiously as we can to proceed as planned. So and again, I know there's a lot of rules and stuff, and we want to follow them like everybody else. So we're proceeding. And I don't, unless you all have questions, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. All right.
So one of my recommendations to the Neighborhood Association, because they are the applicant and have been conducting most of the public outreach, was to conduct an additional public meeting with the property owners in the neighborhood prior to the actual notice public hearing before the HPC occurring. I think that will go a long way in the outreach of some of those property owners who felt that they weren't part of the early discussions or part of the discussions at all. And so that's been staff's recommendation to the applicants as a result of this.
Well, and hopefully this time the message will go long and broad so that those who felt they were missed in the last round of conversations will now have an opportunity to be included. Okay, and now, does that conclude the comments for?
It does. I'll be, as I said, we'll be back in touch with you about scheduling, but that's where we are as of today.
Great. So now we move on to item 9 on the agenda. Annually, we need to have an election of officers at this meeting. It was postponed from the last meeting because of the length of the meeting, so we're picking it up at this meeting. So,
In accordance with your rules of procedure, each May, it is an agenda item for the election of officers. The officers, of course, are the chairperson and vice chairperson. They serve in that capacity for a year. I normally begin the consideration of this item with the chairperson. Currently, Ms. Salaga serves as your chairperson. During the nomination process, I'll ask for nominations, and if an individual is nominated, I'll just ask if they're willing to perform the duties of that position for the next year. And there can be multiple nominations if you choose, but I'll open the floor for nominations for the chairperson.
I'll nominate Ms. Salaga for chair.
We have a nomination for Chairperson Salaga to continue in the role. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, is Ms. Salaga willing to serve in this capacity for the next year?
yes, I will.
Okay. And with that, I'll just ask for a show of hands to affirm the nomination. Thank you. Congratulations. We'll open up the floor for nominations for vice chair. Currently, Commissioner Cobb serves in that capacity. Are there any nominations for the vice chairperson position?
I would like to nominate Commissioner Cobb again.
Okay. And are you willing to serve in the capacity, Commissioner Cobb? Okay. We have a nomination for Commissioner Cobb. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, if I could just have a show of hands for affirming the nomination. Thank you and congratulations. Moving on, as I said, we do have a July hearing scheduled on the calendar. I will get back to you on the need for that. As of right now, we have no applications pending, which is probably welcome on your end because it's been a busy year so far. And moving to item 11, I have no new business for you this morning either.
Then I would, oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Foot?
I have a question. What's on the application that we had last month? What's the schedule for that? First question.
Okay.
Pettis Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I'd ask that we not discuss that case since it's likely to come back before you, and Mr. Fernandez can, there's a process regarding that application. So I'd ask for us not to discuss it, and Mr. Fernandez, when it appears on the agenda, can certainly speak with the commissioners in advance, but I'd ask for us not to discuss that
So
that application.
The schedule is not known now?
Correct.
That's all I was asking.
Correct.
We'll certainly inform you when there's activity on that needs your attention.
And I asked because after that case is completely done, I would like to have a discussion here about that area, a bigger picture discussion. That's all.
Certainly.
That's the only reason.
Ms. Mackle, there was a comment made during the break regarding a workshop for the commissioners. Can you comment on that?
Well, I believe you wanted a workshop, there was discussion of a workshop with staff to explain the different concepts that are in chapter 27 relevant to the Hyde Park district. I mean, not the historic district, I apologize. So we could certainly, work together to get that organized, to have a workshop, giving some clarification on some terms or designation, the code sections that are relevant to the historic district.
Yes,
And-
I'm sorry, I made that suggestion because I personally would find it very, very helpful because there are a lot of different terms, and especially when we're talking about local versus national register and, what the implications of those are. And I would go beyond Hyde Park. I mean, we represent
Absolutely.
all of them, so, and the code applies to all of them. So that would be very helpful to me if we could have a workshop with staff on that.
Sure, I'd be happy to arrange that. We'll try to identify some dates that work for everybody. And
Okay. I don't know if you all support that or not.
I certainly would, because it was clear to me during the course of the previous discussion that some of the definitions of terms were not defined in a way that made clarity possible for the commission. And there are nuances. Those of us who have worked in preservation know that modifications can be made and modifications are undone, and over the history of a building, its life changes. So it'd be helpful to have us understand how that would apply.
sure, we can certainly, if you have any suggestions for discussion points, feel free to send them to me, and we'll start to build that for you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments of new business that anyone would like to bring up? Yes, Ms. Swift.
Yeah, I forgot this. I'm not sure if I sent forward this in an email and to whom, but I received an invitation to do like some kind of group.
360 or something.
Yeah, with the commission, and that seemed like not a good idea. So I wasn't sure if that was legit, bogus, but these days you just can't tell.
So,
Was that your programming?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just address it, but in the changeover from Ms. Jusak to Ms. Owen, there was a need to create another group email so that we could email all the information to you as a group and not necessarily putting everybody's individual emails in there. And the result was that message that we were unaware was going to be generated. So what we did was essentially we deleted the group. So there's not a necessity for you all to feel like you have to, caution yourselves if you respond. So I
Thank you.
probably should have called you back with that, but we
feel
kind
much
of took
better
care of the
about that.
problem.
Okay, any other comments, announcements? Then the meeting is adjourned. It is approximately 10:56-ish.
C'est ça qui fait pays pas qu'à développer, c'est un cap passé, c'est l'âge